Expo in itself has an institutional identity and has a foundation and has a mission and has not just this weekend, it's not just an event, but actually an organization that does all of these things for comics. So we've assembled a powerful crew of different perspectives on that kind of institution building and on those kind of institutions. And I guess to start, immediately to my right is Sarah Duke, and I actually screwed up this title writing it out, but it's Curator of Popular and Applied Graphic Art at the Library of Congress. We have Tom Hart, the longtime cartoonist, one of my favorite cartoonists, and how would you describe, what is he related? Is it founder, president? How do you?
The title I made up was Executive Director.
Executive Director of Sequential Artists Workshop, which is located in Gainesville, Gainesville.
Florida.
We have Caitlin McGurk from Ohio State's Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, the very fantastic institution up in Columbus, the scary big city that no one talks about in America. I'm actually terrified of Columbus, Ohio. And on the end we have Cheryl Kaminsky. Yeah, excuse me, I'm the worst handwriter in the world. I couldn't print anything out. Of the, it's AS220, would that be, or AS220 Space in Providence, which is which I'm going to look forward to bringing Cheryl's perspective later, because that's a kind of a community-driven space with a lot of different arts that they support, including comics. So I think there'll be a lot she'll have a lot to add. And I thought we'd get started, start with Sarah and kind of talk about, just to give an idea of what an institution can provide and what kind of services they provide, is talk about their weekend and what this weekend means for them. Like, Sarah, what is, from your perspective, the Library of Congress, what is it you're doing this weekend? What is your goal for a weekend like this one?
Most of you are probably aware that the Library of Congress formed a partnership with SPX last year. Warren and I actually were working on it for a couple of years before an agreement was signed. And that was Georgia Higley, who's the person in charge of the comic book collection in the library, and I sat down about 3 years ago, and we realized that there was an explosion in publishing, and the library was missing out because small press creators were not depositing their works for copyright. And how could, our job is to help researchers. We're called the Library of Congress, we serve Congress first, but we're the de facto national library of the United States, and if we're not collecting something, then it may not be available to anybody anywhere. And there are great institutions in this country that collect many comics, but most of them don't. Most of them collect mainstream comics. And so when Warren sat down and offered a partnership, I jumped on the opportunity, because if we don't collect mini comics in 100 years, there are researchers who are going to go, well, there was this explosion in publishing, and what happened to it? Where was it? And what came out of it? And so we recognize that, and this weekend means for us a chance to acquire things, works of art and publications that would not normally come to the library. So.
Okay. And then you actually have people out on the floor looking at stuff and gathering material and curating right there on the floor.
So there are 4 of us from the Library of Congress. There's myself, and then I have a colleague, Martha Kennedy, who shares my title in the Prints and Photographs Division. And then Georgia Higley, who's in charge of the comic book collection in the Serials Division of the library. And then Megan Helsband, who's a reference librarian in the Serials Division. And the 4 of us. And then Warren asked Rob Clow to be a guest curator and to take his eye and to walk through the floor and say, what does the library need to have for people? And then Warren Bernard himself is walking through the floor and deciding what the library needs to have. And we will sort through and make sure there's no duplication. Duplicate publications will go back to individuals. But it's really wonderful to be able to walk up to people and to acknowledge their creativity. We're not collecting everything on the floor. We're trying to collect diversity. We want to represent the diversity of the United States. We want to represent the diversity of what's created. We want to represent the best of the best. And I'm in charge of actually original cartoon art at the library. And it's very hard to get creators to separate their original cartoon art. It's very easy to get them to separate from their publications. But we hope that by asking people to consider donating original art, that it will plant the seed in their mind that the Library of Congress is a place to look at original art as well.
Now, Tom, I know that you could come to a weekend like this and have in the past, as you know, in your role as a cartoonist and kind of a comics community member, but you have a very specific role now in your executive directorship, or however. What does this weekend mean for you? What is it that you do at a weekend like this in terms of your role with SAW?
Well, it's complicated because we're still figuring out exactly what we do. And when I created the Sequential Arts Workshop, it was with a pretty broad mission. The main one was to educate people, or to educate creators rather, to teach comics basically. But I also want to promote comics. I want to promote comics literacy. I want to help creators where I can. There's any number of ways. The primary engine right now, though, is to get people to take our workshops, to come down, or maybe take them online, which is still very budding, or sign up for our year-long program. So it's first and foremost a school, but we're trying to promote where we can. And for instance, we just gave some money away because I found some money, not a lot, and we could have used it to pay the bills and to pay my landlord and stuff. But it was right at the exact time I had heard about the Zara grant closing, and I decided there needed to be something just out there. I just wanted to open the conversation about a kind of grant program like that. So I took what measly amount of funds we had and started a small grant program, very small. So my being here is promoting all of those things, telling people about everything we're doing, mostly trying to get people to take our classes too, which I'm extremely proud of. They're good classes. And we also are creating a sort of community down in Gainesville, which is very organic, and but I sense that it's going to be a very strong community of creators and printers and promoters, and I'm not sure exactly, but it's a bunch of things. We're also very tied into the University of Florida, which is a massive university, and some of the ways in which we're tied in is informal, meaning I know those people and I have dinner with them and we talk about everything together, or planning certain projects, and then there are a couple other official people. So the question about what am I doing here at SPX, I'm just promoting all of that stuff.
Right. So kind of a emotional kind of general way. And also kind of, it sounds like you feel out kind of what your institution is going to be, even a little bit. Yeah.
I've always, every creative project I've done, I sort of had a vague idea of what it should be, and then I started it, and then it's sort of guided me as much as I've guided it. So. Now,
Caitlin, you made or spearheaded a very exciting announcement this week about the Dillon Williams collection up at the Library and Museum, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about having something like that to bring to a show like this one, what that means in terms of, are you hearing from people specifically about that? Are you here kind of talking to people about that, since that's the latest endeavor, initiative?
I'd say that that's one of the many reasons that I'm here, and I think it's a really exciting thing that we're starting to do. As far as the broader question of what's my place in this for OSU, I think that establishing the cartoon library as part of the comics community, the contemporary comics community, feels really important to me because I think the majority of people view our collection as a collection of newsprint comics because of the Bill Blackbeard collection there, and editorial and political cartoonists. But even though we do have some contemporary works, we're not as big into that community as I think we should be. And so being here to start supporting current creators more and building relationships with people whose work we hope to house someday is really important for us. And as far as the Dillon Williams collection goes, we were able to get some acquisition funds to start buying materials that kind of emulate the spirit of Sparkplug Comics. So we're looking to support small press publishers and mini comics artists with an emphasis on handmade books and art books. So we'll be going around meeting people, hopefully getting some donations and buying some things.
No, is this, and in terms of when you say that you want to kind of reconnect or connect the library to the current comics making, is that something that when you went to work for Ohio State that you kind of saw as a need, or is it something that's important to you and that you kind of then brought to the institution and are kind of working with them in that direction, or is that something that even might have pursued you in order to do?
Well, I'd say both. I am the outreach curator there.
Okay.
So I do a lot of the teaching, and I give talks, go to panels and stuff like that. It's a really, really small staff. There's only 4 of us full time there, and so no one has really, in a lot of ways, had time or put an effort towards going to places like SPX. I've been attending SPX and other cons for years as a cartoonist and a librarian, so it was sort of half and half. Like, I recognized this need. No one else, was going to places like SPX previously, so just kind of connecting my history and my community with my career that is built into that community.
Yeah. But, and Cheryl, I wonder if we could take it. I don't know even if you have a goal in mind according to, I don't know if this is even a professional weekend for you in that sense, but I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what role comics has in the overall kind of array of services and array of things that you do up there in the community. And then I wonder, when you talk to a little bit, kind of give us an idea of what you're doing. I have a follow-up in terms of how that place developed.
Right. I always sort of miss stuff when I go down the list of what we do, but we started in 1985 as an open forum for the arts locally, so you could have a chance to perform on the stage or exhibit your art. Anyone in the state of Rhode Island, it's in our mission statement that you have the right to have an exhibit there. And that expanded over time to include education, woodwork studios for artists. We have black and white photo darkrooms, a print shop that offers offset, litho, silkscreen, risograph, pretty much every form of printmaking you can imagine. We have like a fab lab that you can use a shop bot or like do all those computer controlled fabrication tools and electronics. We have media arts. So we have a lot of resources for artists. It depends on what your persuasion is. So there are a lot of comics that come out of the print shop. And we don't really control production. We're not producers. We're just providers of resources. They're really affordable. You can take workshops that are community-based, so people who come in the shops and develop their skills, become teachers. We pay everybody from top to bottom $17 an hour. So our instructors from the community get $17 an hour, our artistic director gets $17 an hour, everybody. So it kind of creates this more egalitarian atmosphere, and it also keeps the administrative cost really slim, which is a lot of the reason why institutions don't direct resources back to artists, because they have to maintain their hefty administration. So,
No, that's great. Well, I just wanted to get some idea of what you want to do, because I think one thing that's really exciting when I was looking, and I think might be instructive to comics, and something that Phil suggested when he put you on this panel, was that it is a very community-based group, and we do have stronger and stronger communities in comics in different geographical locations around the country, and I wondered if it's not instructive to learn from how you guys developed, and I wonder if you can even talk to this as kind of a reflection of your artistic community as opposed to serving a previous or a greater institution. It really is reflective of what that community wants and desires. Am I right? Is that a fair characterization? And do you see this as a replicable formula in other communities or for comics communities?
Definitely, and I think we're getting a lot more attention at that from both our funders and similar organizations that are giving a lot of visits. I'll just talk about the print shop in particular because I think that's the most applicable here. The members who are paying to use the studio, so there's like an annual membership, maybe like $40, and then you pay either by the block or by the month, and you can subsidize your rates by being a volunteer in the space. If you can't afford anything, you could go to the program coordinator and kind of like work out a deal, maybe donate some art. But our goal is to serve anyone who needs the space to create original work. Is it replicable? I think so. I mean, I think there are conditions that made it really right in Providence at the time that we started. It was kind of an industrial wasteland, and there was nothing downtown except like drug trade and prostitution and abandoned buildings. So it was cheap, and they were interested in moving some parts down there. It probably wouldn't be cheap now to start off as a fledgling organization. The way it's run sort of keeps it responsible in terms of the community it serves. There's the group of core members, the key members, who pay like a certain set fee, which is pretty low, but they also take a managerial role in running the shop and have to come to regular meetings, discuss like initiatives. They help in the planning of what's coming next for the shop. So it's probably about 12 people, and they're the most involved in using the resources, and they decide, you know, what kind of equipment they want to invest in, what kind of projects they want to take on.
Well, yeah, I guess, you know, that brings up a fascinating point in that it's a multi-arts facility, it's a multi-arts organization, and I wonder if maybe Caitlin or those of you that work for larger institutions that have that there's a larger context for what you do, if you find that kind of has an impact on how you're able to approach comics, or how, I mean, in terms of the Library of Congress, is there a different way that you go about things for the fact that there are any number of different types of publication that the Library of Congress serves? I mean, being a component of a whole, is that different than being someone like Tom, who has a comics-focused organization?
Yeah, sure. I work for a government bureaucracy.
Sure.
So
sure.
it might take me longer to do things, and people with whom I come in contact often think that they have infinite resources, which isn't true either. But it's possible to think outside the box and work, not independently, because everything has to be done in conjunction with the chain of command, but they're pretty amenable. The people above me are pretty flexible and supportive in the initiatives that we've taken. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the partnership with SPX. But in some ways, I'm the odd person out on this panel because I don't just do comics. I also collect historical prints and historical drawings and ephemera within my own department. But cartooning, caricature and cartoon already plays a big role in what I do.
Okay. For sure. I mean,
Yeah, but we also try in our work to support what we think researchers will want, what Congress will want. I get some pretty bizarre requests, and so I can usually pull through and find what people are looking for. For example, I once had a congressional request for cartoons about income taxes. So you never know how people are going to come at.
the most exciting cartoons there are.
No. So, but people tend to come at our collections either by creator, they want to see particular creators, or they want to come at it by topic, and the majority actually want to come by topic and not by creator.
Right.
It's people like yourselves who really care passionately about the genre that come at it by creator. The majority of researchers are looking for a topical illustration.
Caitlin, do you have is there anything to be said for working within the wider, Ohio State support system? Is there something different about working for are you guys left alone?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely something to be said. It was especially interesting for me because before I had this position at OSU, I was the head librarian at the Center for Cartoon Studies, the Scholl's Library there. So that's like the smallest school in America, and then going to OSU, which I think at this point is the largest. You have 70,000 students there. And the Cartoon Library is one of 9 special collections at OSU. So we do have to, even though we're left alone, we're actually, in a completely separate area from, physically from the university libraries. We do have to work within the greater bureaucracy, and things move really slow, probably, I'm sure you know it, to get things approved. Things like the Dillon collection was in the works for a long time, and only in the past week really came through, so just in time for SPX, thank goodness. But like I said, we're a small staff, and it's very much a family there. All of the full-time employees are women. They're really, huge comics fans and brilliant ladies. It's very, very supportive as a tight little family. And so I think like when we do have to get up, at bat for things within the larger university, we support each other a lot, and there's usually, it's things do happen. They just take a lot of time. And even, so we're moving to this amazing new facility next year. And just to give like a strange example of the way this works, we've raised all of the money to move into that building ourselves. I mean, we've had Gene Schultz meet every donation that we got, but the $14 million or something like that it's costing has all been fundraisers that we've had to do, just the cartoon libraries have to do. The OSU has not done for us, which seems strange, but luckily it's working and we're going. So.
Well, that's a nice place to go, because I think that's something that maybe doesn't get talked about that we might as well go ahead and talk about. And it's something that we certainly turn to institutions for, which is the money issue. And Tom, you would have probably a way different perspective, because you're not terrifically, you're very early in your stages. And how much of what you do is kind of dependent on you finding ways to fund things, or do you just ignore, or do you just kind of go on? I find it very interesting, because you're very early on, and you don't have an institution. Maybe there's some money coming for you if it's in Florida, I don't know. But I wondered, how much of what you do is concerned with kind of fundraising or potential fundraising or finding ways around fundraising.
Finding ways around it. No, we're very, very, very new and very small nonprofit. In fact, we're so new that our paperwork is still sort of in this negative zone with the IRS. And figuring out funding is a pretty major issue that is always on my to-do list for tomorrow. So working around the sort of lack of funding has been a lot of what I've been doing. So, at this point, I'm just trying to keep the lights on, keep the students taught, and keep the faculty who isn't, any faculty who's not me, reasonably paid, and then just doing whatever tiny little access I can find, doing something interesting with it that I think promotes good cartooning for creators who need it, or books that need a little more visibility or whatever. But the finding of funding, it's definitely tomorrow. It's my plan for tomorrow. What I need is I need somebody to help.
I was going to say, do you ever see a day when you bring on someone that kind of has that function? Okay.
I've had a couple conversations in town where I'm at. I'm getting a little bit of help, but I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like in the long term. But I do know. I've made small forays into our city, our local government, our city government, our county government, and they know we exist now, and I think they're pretty friendly to our mission. A lot of the university knows about us and stuff. So I've been making those like first conversations, and they've also been both the entire community, both the informal community and the formal community at the university and things. They're all pretty happy with what we've been doing so far. So again, it's part of tomorrow's plan is to start figuring out where they might know some funding, where they might be able to help us out. But I'm really a creative person at heart. It's not my strength to figure that out. Anyone in the audience, you can. Yeah, let's talk later.
That's my full-time job.
Well, can you talk about that being your full-time job then? It's how. I have no idea how you guys are funded, so I wonder if that's.
Yeah.
Can somebody please talk about the failure of the Boca Raton Museum?
Failure.
Raton Museum?
Yeah.
This is Mort Walker's Boca Raton Museum.
I don't know why it failed, but I presume it's because it was in Boca Raton and not.
That's a big part of it, and that's kind of instructive, because we have seen a lot of failures with organizations in the last few years. Mort Walker's museum in Boca Raton,
It was supposed to move to the Empire State Building.
which was supposed to move to the Empire State Building.
It actually went to Ohio State.
Oh,
We
okay.
have the entire
Terrific.
IMCA collection.
Great.
You have the entire, so the collection has ended up at Ohio State, it sounds like. Boca Raton, I think he just got, if I remember the story correctly, this is the one that was wearing strip circles, he just got a sweetheart of a deal to put it in Boca Raton, and it just never materialized in actual people wanting to go to Boca Raton to look at strip art. You know, it's very...
I saw when it was in Connecticut, it was a great space
And
for it. It was near New York City.
It was in Connecticut before that and was a great space. And I think that one of the reasons that we wanted to have the panel and just broach the idea of paying more attention to our institutions is that a lot of these organizations almost in a comics history have been lone wolf organizations. There have been one guy that's a benefactor, whether it's more, or the primary benefactor, whether it's more, or whether it's Kevin Eastman when he had a museum up in Northampton. And there are real dangers when you don't kind of develop the institution to last beyond the person who has that initial idea. And I'm sure that's something Tom
I think about that all the time.
worries about, that he wants an institution bigger than Tom.
Yeah.
Because Tom's not, you're not so big. You're kind of a little guy. So, but you know, just in general, these kind of lone wolf kind of, and they're beautiful things, and it's a wonderful thing that Moore decided to spend some of his great fortune doing that, but it's sometimes maybe the lack of institutional strength is what kind of failed them, and also Boca Raton. And we're crapping on Boca Raton. I'm sorry if anyone's from Boca Raton.
We've actually gotten donations of original art based on the fact that Library of Congress has been the Library of Congress since 1801. And we haven't gone away. There is enough art and enough publications to fill tons of institutions around this country. I'm not meaning to imply that everything should end up at the Library of Congress, but we are stable, and that does play a role in our acquisitions.
Even in a situation with MoCA, which went through their recent, and they ended up kind of folding into the Society of Illustrators, I think just the fact that they had an identity, kind of a brand, and kind of a group, that there was something to take to a Society of Illustrators to survive in some way. And if it had been like just one guy's museum, you know, Bob's MoCA, or something. But I don't think it would have lasted that. So I hope that if we leave anything, or just by the fact that we had this panel today, that we kind of pay more attention to developing our institutions so that we have that support. It's not just any one person, and we can bring in talented people like, you know, Cheryl and Caitlin, and I guess Tom a little bit, and Sarah. But we can employ these talents in a way that doesn't like depend solely on these talents, which I think is the strength of an institution, right? You know, if we're all meeting at SPX over at some guy's house, it would be a really crazy show. I mean, it would probably be it could only be as big as the house. But the fact that it's growing, yeah, it would be like the best 2 years ever, and we'd all still talk about it. But the fact that we're here and they have an institution and they can bring in, you know, Chris Orr, you know, back in the day had this skill set, and now Warren has his kind of corporate kind of communication skill set. I think that's a strength. So, yeah, I think the failure of something like that is really instructive. So, and I wonder, you know, I guess because we're about halfway through the hour,
Cheryl was going to talk about funding.
Cheryl was going to talk about funding, but this is what you do. I mean, how would you describe what you do, and how do you provide that service to an organization like yours?
Well, it is true that there's a bias in funding towards established institutions. So since we've been around for 27 years, we have a $3.4 million budget. They can give us money, they know we're not going to go under next year. It's sort of a safe bet. For a small organization that's been around for a year, we watch a lot of them go under in the past couple of years in Providence, and it's been, you know, across the nation, no problem. So what I do is write grants, mostly. We have a lot of strong funders like NEA and Kresge and Ford have actually been funding us for the last 2 years, so feeling pretty good about that. That's a pretty positive place to be in. But I think for cartoonists, I mean, I think we're talking about two different things. Institutions that support comics as like an art form and help legitimize the art form, and then institutions that support cartoonists. And what are the needs of the institutions that support cartoonists? I would say money and maybe like healthcare. And you know, institutions that support comics do support cartoonists indirectly, of course, because you get a generated appreciation of the art form. There starts to be more of a market. It starts to be taken more seriously. You can get, you know, gallery shows. You can get, you know, sell books, whatnot. But Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff is moving over, it's not needed for institutions to support some of that stuff anymore. Like marketing is kind of decentralized, you don't need necessarily to have a marketing person to market your work. You can create your own website, you know, use social networking. And with funding, I think that's just starting to move into that category with Kickstarter and things like that. And maybe Meetup will be the next coordination for things like SPX, but that's in the future too. So I think as an institution, there's this like weird contradiction that you have to be very flexible in terms of what needs you're serving, but at the same time you have to be really established and be around for a long time and have a solid identity.
Yeah, well, no, I think that balance is important. I mean, do you think that people kind of shy away from, or the artists kind of have a hang-up about bringing in someone with a skill set to do grants and to make sure the money is taken care of? Or do you find that there is resistance to what it is you do?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay.
I think they'd love to do that. I think development people tend to get paid a lot. I don't, but it's one of the highest paid positions within an organization traditionally. So most people can't afford to hire a grant writer for their book project or whatnot. I mean, we do have a lot of grants locally, like Rhode Island State Council for the Arts and whatnot. We'll do project grants, $1,000, and you know, we're happy to advise like the way our organization works. If someone comes to me and they have this project and they're like, is there anything you can do to help me? I would say, you know, we might be able to fiscally sponsor that person to help them get a grant that wouldn't otherwise apply to them, or just advise them as to what's out there in terms of individual grants.
Let me, you know, because we're more than halfway past the hour and they actually make us chop a little early. I would love to start taking questions because if anyone's going to spend an hour with us, I want to have ample opportunity.
You're talking a lot about like sustaining the suspension of comic books like beyond the initial people who support it. And I think one thing that could probably help that is integrating it into a more academic setting, like perhaps even earlier. Because like I know colleges are starting to have more classes that focus on graphic novels as a medium, but even like high school, middle school, get it in there. Like, I don't know, what do you guys think about the reality of that? I guess librarians would probably be the best to ask about that.
You're talking about getting comics themselves or the institutions into, are you talking about getting the comics into the middle school libraries, high school, college libraries, or the institutions grafted into the larger institutions?
The comics into the schools, into the, like the hands of, because I mean,
Sure.
I think a lot of the literature kids are forced to read, like it's outdated, you know, comic books are probably more
That seems to be
reasonable.
changing as far as I can see. Every middle
Yeah.
school I know has tons of graphic novels now.
Yeah, there's a graphic novel section in most middle schools, at least in Montgomery County, where we are right now.
All right.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
go ahead.
we're not sure if this is going to happen yet, but for our opening year next year in our new building, we're trying to get the freshman required reading book to be a graphic novel for all OSU freshmen. So.
And SPX, I don't know if you are aware, has a partnership with different areas, libraries and school programs to get mini comics into, last year was the Montgomery County Public Library System, and I think this year it's the Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore is going to be the recipient. So they are also actively promoting the distribution of things that would not traditionally be able to be purchased by school libraries because they might not be distributed in the same way.
Okay.
And one thing that's interesting about that partnership is that they actually work with the people they work with the libraries more directly. It's not a gift program. They kind of allow the libraries to kind of pick and choose and look at what's out there and see what they want. So I think you're seeing more partnerships and there's a kind of greater baseline understanding from our librarians as to what the value of these books are, and that allows kind of exciting programs where we're not just, you know, leaving a stack of graphic novels on the desk and saying, you know, the kids, it's people, you know, that are really actively involved in selecting the books that are useful for them. So let me, yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I guess this is a question more for Caitlin and Sarah, going back to the concept of funding with acquisitions, as far as acquisitions go. If you're looking, obviously, for if you're looking for papers, if you're looking for archives, and the person who is thinking of giving them to you needs to monetize them, you know, it's not like the heirs who can get the tax break. Is this something that you have been able to generate funding for? Is this something that you just kind of cede to the Harry Ransom Center that has more money than God and is buying stuff that they should not have? I mean, how does that work for you guys?
We have an acquisitions budget. It comes from taxpayers. We're a government-funded institution. But we are also very fortunate that we have trust funds. We have the Carolina Irwin Swan Memorial Fund, which is different from the Carolina Irwin Swan Fellowship Fund, which pays for graduate students to do research for a year, and is offered, Martha Kennedy administers that grant, and it's offered once a year. And that pays for exhibitions and preservation and acquisitions, the Memorial Fund. And then we have the Alfred Lindner Memorial Fund, and that pays for acquisitions.
And I guess they're effective.
They're not, you know, it depends on the economy, how they're doing, and what we have to pay for institutionally. We've had to pay for some exhibition space. We have a graphic arts gallery at the Library of Congress. It's dedicated to caricature and cartoon. In fact, I have an exhibition opening next Saturday, if I can do some self-promotion. It's called Down to Earth, which combines herbal cartoons with environmental photography.
The vast majority of our collection is donated, but we do have an acquisition fund. It comes from the larger university libraries, and it's not huge by any means. So I'm not sure which, being that I'm fairly new, I only started there in February, I'm not sure which papers in the past we've actually purchased. I know that the majority of our acquisitions are on bound books and original artwork. So.
Do you know that if you've lost things that you could pay for?
Oh yeah,
Lost the opportunity?
there's been many things that people have called us and, like you were saying, assumed that we have an endless amount of money, which we really don't. I mean, the library was built by Lucy Caswell, who started the whole thing herself and had to fight OSU to get them to give her money to do it. So we've had to pass up a lot of things, unfortunately.
No, we lose stuff all the time. And sometimes we lose stuff because we don't, in the prints and photographs division, we don't generally take archives, but the manuscript division does. But convincing them that they want the papers of people who write comics can be very difficult. And then they don't want to pay for anything. They make a point of not paying for papers. People should want to be at the library, and so it's, yeah, but it doesn't have to be in one institution in the country. You don't want everything in one institution. You want it.
No, I know you have one in mind.
Sir? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess related to that, I was wondering about, for all of you in your outreach or in your acquisitions, what sort of underrepresented areas or blind spots, whatever you want to call it, you really think you need to focus on. Sarah knows that my own research takes me to Eastern Europe and to Latin America, and what my contacts there always tell me is how difficult it is to break into the American market. But is it really up to maybe someone like Caitlin to be worried about collecting Eastern European comics, or should that be left to Slavic studies departments, or just anything about that, how you guys feel about what needs to be worked on?
I guess because we collect internationally. The Library of Congress has more books in languages other than English than it has books in English. We do try to collect. I tend to be the one who pays attention to comics, but if I tell somebody in one of the area studies that I want a particular publication, they generally will buy it and they won't quibble, especially if it's in the former Soviet republics. But I get really tired. It's a lot of work to figure out what's being published in other countries. And those area studies people are not interested in comics. They're not going to go out looking for them. So it's going to be hit or miss what comes in.
Tell me about it.
Let me redirect that, because it's actually triggers a question in my mind. And Tom, you are a very well liked and admired teacher at SBA before you headed then to Florida, and so you were part of an institution, and now you're going and starting an institution of your own. I mean, how do you conceive of, is this, I mean, there has to be an element where you think of something that there's something unique that you're offering, whether it's to an area or whether it's a degree of emphasis or something that you do. I can't imagine this is just, I want my own of this.
No, that was it.
You know, it's like it's a total ego trip. Well, how do you define, like, when you are you're developing your institution now, and I think maybe some of these people here will think about starting groups or organizations or working for them in their own town and making their own unique contribution. How do you think of your own unique contribution? Why do we need your thing?
I mean, me particularly, I was a poor and scrappy artist for a long time, or a poor and scrappy art student, and I just wanted to be a place for poor and scrappy art students, primarily. So I'm trying to find, but people who are very dedicated. When you first go to art school, if you're 18 or whatever, a lot of there's a variety of kinds of people you're going to meet. That's a sliver of them are going to be super dedicated and intensely focused on their work. I'm interested in those people. You'll see the ones who their parents pushed them into art school. You'll see the ones who are on too many drugs or just want to party. I mean, so I wanted to be for the person without a lot of resources but with a lot of drive. I mean, that's what I wanted to do.
It's interesting. I mean, we're all comics or comics interested people. We know that comics, there's a tendency in comics to start your own thing, like not join, not be a joiner. Like, you know, there's always that thing where they would start, you know, I'll start my own comics line. Every publisher has no one's purchasing a comics line or being part of it. They're like starting their own. It's always some guy, I can do it.
I'm already looking at the day where I get maligned and hated and kicked out or whatever for the same reason. It's like, I'm gonna start my own.
Yeah, you're gonna have someone start your own. So I think that's an interesting balance. Do you have a question, Mike? Was it earlier? Did I see your hand?
Lots of hands up. There's one up.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Given the forward-thinking notion of just even having this panel, I assume that there's this undercurrent of developing a larger American institutional network here, just between organizations. There already are some between all of the university libraries and collections, and the Library of Congress. But I'd just like to know from every one of you, just like, or maybe you hadn't thought of this, but what do you see your next steps in developing that kind of network in the United States for your particular organizations?
Cheryl, are you guys connected? I mean, is there a network of like-minded organizations that you work with at all?
There is. We're actually part of an initiative through the Ford Foundation right now, which is a bunch of arts groups that we have, we all connect on Skype or whatever and talk about stuff and present our work to each other. Like, oh, look at this is our marketing campaign. Everyone critiques it together and stuff. I mean, that's not really, I don't think what we're talking about.
Okay.
I think there's still a really informal network of artists and creators that goes on. Like, we have a print lottery that is up this month. It's a big fundraiser for the print shop, and it's like 200 pieces of print-based work. So it's like illustrators from across the country, and we have an artist residency program. We have once a month a visiting artist. So I think it keeps us kind of like linked into this larger network of creators. That's not, in terms of organizations, there's the administration, and we're linked up to other administrators, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case that anyone's in.
Okay.
For us, well, there are a ton of comics librarians in the world, so most of us know each other and see each other at conferences and talk in that kind of way. And I think that a big thing with, for example, Karen Green, who's a graphic novels librarian at NYU, that she and, I'm sorry. and she and Jenny Robb, who's the head curator at my university, have talked about, the idea of not competing for the same kind of artwork, because, for example, there's a cartoon library at Michigan State, and they are really focusing on collecting single issues, like floppy comics. So we don't do that. We don't spend all of our acquisitions money for that, because they're going to cover that, and it's going to be protected and archived for good, So we talk on that kind of level. I wish there was more. For example, I would love to talk about how how to archive webcomics. It's a big thing. I wish there was a like discussion group on someday.
We're actually doing that now.
Are you?
Yeah.
We should talk later.
That's a really good example of what I was trying to bring up before. Randall Scott at MSU for 30 years was especially interested in stuff from Mexico, stuff from Latin America, but that's just his particular serendipitous kind of personality. You know, is there a way to, I don't know, make it more of a more formal process to look out for stuff like that from underrepresented populations? I know that you guys are looking for so-called diverse material this weekend, right? Precisely for those reasons.
Right. You know, we're always trying to fill what we call gaps. We're trying to do that. But to address the question about participation as an organization, the Library of Congress belongs, you know, itself belongs to a lot of organizations, but we as staff members also belong to a lot of organizations, and we network and we know each other, and we have conversations, we participate on listservs. So don't think necessarily about like the superstructure. The superstructure is a superstructure, but that doesn't mean that the people within the superstructure don't form their own networks and their own systems, because we do. And those are probably equally viable and for us as individuals more important than what the organizations to which the institution belongs.
You know, I also think, to your question, there's a lot of just general institutional development which has an impact on the way people look at things. The fact that we have more people that are doing this that will kind of play off of one another. I mean, I think what Tom is doing, for instance, is very different for the fact that James Sturm has his school, and James' school will probably feel the effect over the years of Tom's school also being there in terms of who they might serve or the kind of students they might serve, the kind of services they might provide. So I think it's like other organizations like develop and do things that people react to that and will start to do them themselves, whereas if you're kind of left out on your own without any sense of anyone else out there, you're left to your own development employees. Yes, sir.
Tom, going back to Jose's question, at one point Lucy and Randy Scott divided the world between them, and OSU took the eastern, and Michigan State took the west, so they took Europe and Latin America. I think since Lucy's retired, that agreement sort of fizzled a little bit, also with modern interests. And what I was going to say before was Michigan State's acquisitions budget. It barely breaks 5 figures for comics. So they're not buying everything that comes out now. They're relying on donation for that cable. And Randy is a lone librarian, so he's 3 years from retirement. Who knows what will happen to the collection after he goes.
They want us to actually end these things about 10 minutes early, right? Am I right, Bill? So maybe one more question from someone. Yes, sir.
Well, another grants question. Looking at with the Zurich grant on, is it, I think it's worth it for cartoons to look into other grant programs for self-published comics?
Checkai's had a lot of luck with that. He wrote an article in the Commerce Journal, actually a number of years ago. But every cartoonist I know is looking into it in some way, and always they're like, am I in the art category, the literature category? And they're always doing that kind of thing. But what we need to do is connect with more people like Cheryl and say, how do we do this? But to me, it seems like those doors are opening up. Somebody else can do that as well.
Absolutely. I think the best first place to look is your state arts council. They probably have a project grant or individual artist grant, and they're not going to be too intensive as far as the application. So it's always a great place to start. But yeah, connect with people like me at home. Or here.
Does anyone have anything that's going on specifically here? I know, Tom, you're set up somewhere. You can tell everyone where you are, but is anyone specifically set up and would like people to visit or like people to pay attention to something specific?
Well, we're in Gainesville, Florida. You're welcome to stop by.
Well, you're exhibiting at the show.
Oh, upstairs you mean, W67, I think? Yeah.
Okay. So Tom's set up there, and I hope that all of you will remember the names or keep the program and look at what everyone's doing and kind of pay more attention to institutions in general, both those that you can get stuff from and those that you can participate in the other direction, and that we kind of have institutional advancement the same way we've had such a massive and wonderful artistic advancement over the years, because these people are doing wonderful work. So I hope that you all learn more about them. And I thank you so much for coming out and being such an attentive audience. And you can help me thank the panelists.